So we're on U.S. History, Chapter 2. And now we're going to talk about the 13 original colonies. And you can see the picture there, and you'll be able to see all of those colonies down from Georgia all the way up to past Maine, which was Massachusetts then, you see. So you see all of these, the blue, the New England, the red are the middle colony. Let's kind of put it there. The green are the southern colony. So, and the years are going to be 1609 to 1733. It says, all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulties and must be both enterprised and overcome with answerable courage. And indeed, the first colonies of America were very courageous, weren't they? So let's begin. We begin with Spain and England. We ended with Spain, as Spain was trying to colonize, especially down in Florida, and then down in the west, including California, New Mexico, Texas. These areas where the Spanish conquistadors had come in, and so Spain led the race, and France followed very close behind. But few would have guessed that England would soon become a serious contender. The small island of England, definitely was having, war times with Spain. But this would drastically change, and England would be on her way to building a vast British empire for which time would include North America. So in time, the British Empire would include most of North America and Canada, right? United States and Canada. So let's begin. Well, let's get going, I should say. England enters the race late in 1585. So remember, 1492 is when Columbus sailed for Spain, right? And claimed a lot of the land. Well, now we have almost 100 years later, we have the perfect timing for England. What was happening then? The spiritual heritage of England. England had become a Protestant nation, where the Bible was free to all. In the Roman Catholic areas, they didn't have the Bible. The people were not even allowed to read the Bible. But now the Bible would be available to all of England. We know this by, of course, John Wycliffe, in 1330 to 1334. That was, a couple hundred years earlier. He exposed the false doctrine of the Roman Church, and he also translated the entire Bible into English from the Vulgate, the Latin Vulgate. And then, of course, we have William Tyndale in 1490, lived 1494 to 1536. He translated the Bible into English from the Greek and Hebrew, and he also had the first printed Bible. So these guys here are very important when it comes into the biblical scheme of things, and bringing the Bible to the normal people, to the regular people. The peasants alike as the wealthy would have Bibles. Well, Tyndale, you see there at the bottom there, that picture, he said, if God spare my life, ere many years I will cause a key while the guy in the plow would know more of the scriptures than you do. So he said, even the regular guy will know the scriptures more than you do. And Wycliffe in the top says, this Bible is for the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This was way back in the 1300s. You can see how it affects America very, very widely, very much. Well, Tyndale, what happened to him? He was put to death by the Roman Catholic Church, and Wycliffe had to take refuge and hide, of course, from persecution, because they did not want the Bible, the English Bible, to get in the hands of the regular English people. Nothing could stop the Bible now. God's word found its way into the hands and hearts of the English people. That's why you have a Bible today. Okay, then we have King Henry VIII. He was one of the Tudor kings, the group of family of the Tudors. He lived 1491 to 1547. Well, King Henry VIII, and I wouldn't call him very Christian-like. In fact, he had all these wives, and some of them, I think there's like 6 of them, and some of them at least a couple of them he put to death. But he broke ties with the Roman Catholic Church, and he founded the Church of England, called the Anglican Church. Now the king was the head of the church. He would be the head of the church and not the Pope. So there was a rivalry there, right? Well, the Anglican, when you think of Anglican, think of English. The Anglican Church had many similar doctrines to Catholicism, so it had a lot of false doctrines too. But it gave the Reformation a foothold in England and allowed the Protestant Reformation to come into England. In 1558, the English people had access to the Bible in their own language too. So now the king actually gave freedom for the Reformation in England, even though he was not a devout Christian man. That is certain. Political heritage. Well, since the Anglo-Saxon, Anglo means England, since the Anglo-Saxon times, rulers had formed a limited representative government. So we're talking about political government. In 1215, that's a long time before 1600s. We're talking about what, 300 or 400 years. A king, King John, and he lived in 1166 to 1216, a long time, signed what's called the Magna Carta, and that was the Great Charter. The reason it was so great is because it guaranteed freedoms for the people. Before that, the king could do anything he wanted. If he wanted to have you killed, he would just have you killed. You didn't have to have a trial, or you wouldn't have anything. He could do anything he wanted. But now, the people wanted a parliament where they had a representative council to the king, so that a king couldn't come on and be a dictator and basically be a tyrant to the people. So then later on, this gave hold to the English Parliament, which would be a political part of the government that would come from represent the people to the king. Well, King John, of course, didn't want to do this, but he was forced to by the nobleman who said, no, you can't do anything you want. So he is forced to sign this Magna Carta, which became one of the greatest political feats in all of England, in all of history of even Europe, because other European kings basically took full-on control and did whatever they wanted. The Elizabethan age, Good Queen Bess. Well, one of King Henry VIII's daughters, first of all, his son became king very short time, and he was very sickly and he died. And then came in Bloody Mary, his other daughter from Spain, who had married King Philip of Spain, and was brought in Roman Catholicism to the point of killing everyone in sight. That's why we called her Bloody Mary, because anyone who did not follow the way of the Pope and the way of the Roman Church was put to death. Well, she ended up dying, and then of course Queen Elizabeth, Good Queen Bess, took over in 1533 to 1603. Queen Elizabeth was she was called the Virgin Queen because she never did get married to a king. She became queen in 1558, and England prospered and became very powerful. She definitely was a Christian. She trusted in God. She trusted in Jesus Christ as her Savior. She supported the Reformation. The Reformation was, Martin Luther and all that had come away from the doctrines of Rome and had come away from the Pope. And she supported the Bible, what the Bible said. So she encouraged justice, responsibility, and biblical Christianity. And she supported trade and exploration too. She also worked with the Parliament. So she was basically, the people loved her, and the Parliament loved Good Queen Bess. That's why she's called Good Queen Bess, Queen Elizabeth I. And England also enjoyed wealth, stability, and biblical morality during this time as people turned to the Lord. Exploration with England. Okay, now we're going to say, okay, now England's wanting to come to the New World for various reasons. Well, the first explorer that was English, and he was actually Italian. It's kind of weird because, you know, Columbus was really Italian and he sailed for Spain. Well, now we have John Cabot, and he was Italian too. So Italians, they'd never sailed for Italy. They always took up and sailed for other countries and were taking league or taking business with other countries to sail for other countries, right? So John Cabot sailed for England. In 1497, he explored the east coast of North America. So, and onto the Canadian border, as you see in that picture there, you see where Greenland is up there to the border of Canada and down the coast of North America. And he was the first to set foot on the mainland of North America. So this was the claim to the New World, his claim, but not his claim for Italy, his claim for England. So England had a claim on the east coast of North America and on into Canada. Like here it says, he's famous for exploring the coastline of Canada and the colonization of Canada. Cabot was the second European to find North America after Christopher Columbus. So that was pretty early, sailing for England, his picture of him. Then there was Sir Martin Frobisher. I never really heard of him much, did you? But he too, he was searching for a Northwest Passage water route from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And Queen Elizabeth too, she hoped that she could break this Spanish monopoly. England and Spain were practically at war. And there's a picture right there. Here's King Philip, and here's the King of Spain, and that's when he was married to Bloody Mary, and who had passed away. But we have Sir Martin. Whenever you have Sir, you know they're English, because that means they're a knight. They're an English knight. And so he went and explored again, as you can see there, the exploring to find a north. He wanted to find a Northwest Passage, a passage that goes to the north, that could go to get to the Orient, to get over to China, which he didn't find, but he surely found a lot in this new land up towards Greenland and Nova Scotia and down the coast to Maine and onto Massachusetts area. So just remember, Frobisher, he was sailed for England. And then, of course, we have Sir Francis Drake from 1540 to 1596. And you see Sir Francis Drake there with Queen Elizabeth. He made a 3-year journey from 1577 to 1580, the first Englishman to sail around the whole world. Who was the first person to sail around the world? Magellan. But Magellan didn't really make it around it, did he? He died and some of his men made it back, right? So now we have this Englishman, Sir Francis Drake, sailing around the world. He sailed on a ship he called the Golden Hind, and it passed through the Strait of Magellan, where Magellan had claimed that area, as he too is sailing around the world. And he also, Sir Francis Drake, even sailed up the coast of California. And he claimed for England as Nova Abian, New England area. Nova Abian meaning New England. He looted Spanish ships on the way because, of course, England and Spain were pretty much at ends and at war with each other. So he looted the Spanish ships and settlements. And he sailed across the Pacific and Indian Ocean. He even sailed around Africa and back to England. And then he returned in 1580 from this 3-year journey. The Queen was so excited that she met him on his ship and had him knighted. Said, "You're going to be a knight now," for he had sailed around the world for England. So that is Sir Francis Drake. Reasons for English colonization. So, of course, good Queen Bess wanted to colonize, but back in that time, a lot of people did not want to come to the new land because it was very harsh, and a lot of people died when they came, and the coming back, from the New World, they didn't see all of the riches that they thought they would see, did they? But England had a reason for colonization. Well, do you remember why Spain and France came? Well, for the gold, right? Especially Spain, came from the gold. And gold, they call it gold, God, and glory. That's where the Spain was, gold, God, and glory. They came over. And then, of course, France came for the fur trading, right? And for the glory. And France tried, and tried, even up to Napoleon's time, to get people to come and colonize and live in America. And the French people did not want to come. They could not get colonies going at all in France, from France. So what would make England want to colonize? Well, first of all, England now had become one of the most important powers in the world. Why? Not just because she was a national competition, but the Englishmen desired freedom. They wanted freedom, religious freedom, political freedom, and economic freedom. They looked on America as a place where that they could be free. That was the difference. So now the English were looking, because as things would get hard in England during times, especially after good Queen Bess and to the other kings, Kings James and King Charles, all the way through, you would see now that England would want political freedom. And of course, they'd want religious freedom from the Anglican Church. They'd want freedom as the Anglican Church would start to control the country. And they'd want economic freedom. Many were put in debtors' prisons. And from debtors' prisons, they'd rather go and work in the New World to gain their freedom. So the reasons for English colonization was not, gold, God, and glory. It was freedom. England, the people that came from England wanted freedom. Religious freedom. See, only those of the Church of England were free to worship in England. Even if you were Catholic, and you lived in England, you could not be one. You could not be it. So now the Church of England pretty much took over. And many dissenters opposed and were persecuted. You see, the Catholics believed the Pope was still the spiritual head, and the Puritans did not. But also, the Puritans remained in the Church of England, but they didn't like the false doctrines that were in the Church of England or the false doctrines that were in the Church of Rome. The Puritans had come out of both, and they became separates, and they withdrew and formed their own churches. Their desire was to worship freely, and they wanted to worship free from any of those church heads, and worship freely and come to America and worship basically on how the Bible said to worship, and how the Bible said to live. Here you see, why did the Puritans come to America? Issue of disagreement. They believed religion to be a personal inner experience, that you experience it in your heart, that one did not need a priest, did not need a bishop, or did not need the government to be the middleman to God. That was the basic thing. They believed freedom. They wanted the freedom to worship God as they saw. You see the pictures here of the Puritans. Political freedom now. That was religious freedom. Now political freedom. In 1603, after good Queen Bess, came King James, and then on to King Charles the First and Second, and we'll go down from there. They attempted now to ignore the Magna Carta and to rule without a parliament. They wanted to go back and be a dictator, basically as a king, dictating to the people what they could do and what they could not do. They believed in the divine right of kings, absolute rule. They believed they were chosen by God and that they were going to rule, and that they could rule without representation, without a parliament, and could tell everyone how to worship too. So they oppressed Englishmen. That many Englishmen thought, we cannot have this. They're doing away with the parliament and everything. We can't have this. So politically, a lot of Englishmen said, let's go to America. Let's be free from this king and his oppression and go to America. So a lot of Englishmen came to America. During King Charles, English Civil War broke out even in England. And that's when we have, the Puritans actually taken over, and basically they overruled the king, King Charles, and they took over the government, under the Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell, Puritan, the Parliament controlled monarchy over Oliver Cromwell. And so now the Parliament was ruling on its own without a king, just during this short time. So many flee to America because they just figured, what else is going to happen here? Some were loyal to the king, and some were loyal to, the royal family, and some were loyal to the Parliament. But there was lots of confusion. So a lot of English people came to America for political freedom either way. Economic freedom. Economic means money, right? Well, in the 17th century, many had economic problems. See, gold and silver from America created inflation in the prices in Europe. And some products were even too expensive to buy, because prices went up. The enclosure movement, what is that? That's where a land owner encloses their hedges and fences all around their land so that people can't get in and out. And this evicted, they had a lot of tenant crop farmers, and so they had to go to the cities, and then there was very high unemployment in the cities. So a lot of these tenants that lived on the landowner were evicted. And so then many of them ended up in what was called debtors' prisons. Some indefinitely, they were put in prison. They could never pay back all of their their bills, I should say, or all of that they own, all of that they owed people, right? So they were debtors. They couldn't pay their debts, so they were put in prison. So thousands of Englishmen, instead of going to prison, came to America. They came to Australia too. In fact, Australia was kind of like a debtor's prison. But at this time, thousands wanted to come to America for freedom, and they would go to America to work off their debts, right? People involved in English colonization. So the monarchs of England, those are the kings and queens, show little interest in colonizing America. The kings and queens they could care less if people came to America. But when they did, it was usually for wealth, honor, and prestige, like especially the King of Spain. So he wanted God glory. He wanted the glory and gold. He was looking for. That's what they looked for. They were looking for wealth, right? But mostly people that coming now from England were more private initiatives. Businessmen sponsored to make a profit and better themselves by coming to America. So to benefit the nation, they would help settlers establish with jobs in America and encourage trade and bring new wealth. So they thought, if we could get people to come to America, and then as they go to America, they'll find jobs and stuff, and they'll be able to pay us back, and we'll have colonies in America. So the settlers came for a variety of reasons, some for adventure. They were looking for adventure to get out of Europe, and others for profit. They thought, if we can go there, we surely can start colonies, and in these colonies, we'll raise crops or however, fur trade or whatever it brings, and bring money back. So these businesses looked to America for profit. The strongest motivation was the desire for freedom, though. Religious freedom first. People wanted to be religious. When they wanted freedom to worship, they would come to America. And then for political, they wanted to be free of the tyrannies in Europe, of the kings controlling them. And then also for economic gain, or for economic freedom, so that they would be able to get out of their debts. So here's the kings and queens of England back then. This is a review for world history. We have the House of Tudor, of course, is Henry VII and Henry VIII. Remember Henry VIII that killed a few of his wives, that beheaded him, and I don't know. He was not the greatest king. And then his son Edward, and then Bloody Mary. See, Edward, Bloody Mary, and Elizabeth were his children. So Edward the Sixth in 1547 only ruled for a short time as a Protestant king, Bloody Mary came in from the as representing Spain, as she was married to King Philip of Spain, and came in to bring England to the Catholic Church, which they didn't want to do. So she ended up killing, thousands of people. And on to good Queen Bess, Elizabeth. They were the House of Tudor. And then on to the House of Stuart. Because Elizabeth didn't have any children, the House of Stuart would take over, which was under Mary Stuart. So basically her son, James I, became king, the Stuart king, onto Charles. And then, of course, Charles was kicked out because the monarch, the Cromwell Puritans, took over, the Parliament took over and kicked him out because he wanted to be a dictator. And then after that period of time in 1649, Charles II restored as king. He became king again. And then James II onto the William and Mary. That William and Mary had taken over at that time, onto Anne. They were all Stuarts. So from the Stuart line, from Anne had no children. So the House of Hanover, George I, George II, George III, and George IV, the Georges. And this area is very important with the Georges. Why? Because this is when was the Declaration of Independence. It's when America became a nation, and the Revolutionary War happened during the times of the Hanover kings, which were George. So that time, actually, the George time, I always say, is that when they were coming against America, and the Revolutionary War, where America would become independent. So that's it, just for a review here, and then we're going to go on in the next video.